Today we are highlighting the strange case of Elemental Shaman. Now, before you get worried, no, Elemental Shaman is still likely an S tier spec when it comes to Mythic Plus, and they are also still a very competitive spec in the raid. So, we're not gonna be talking about Elemental Shaman being bad right now. We're not gonna be talking about Elemental Shaman being weak. It still isn't. However, it is worth pointing something out about the state of Elemental right now. Because right as we got into the beta and into the first weeks of the beta, there wasn't a lot of confidence about the state, not just of Elemental, but of Shaman in general. Shaman was still pre-rework, there were still quite a lot of issues around the three specs, their general talents as well as their spec trees, and then the hero talents were announced. You had Farseer, which was practically not even working. The little spooky grandpas weren't even doing anything, they were barely any of your damage. To make it even better, your Stormbringer hero talent for Elemental was so bad it was actually a DPS loss, because it was a longer cast time. That Lightning Bolt didn't even overload and had barely more damage than your normal Lightning Bolt. It got to a point where Shamans, if they wanted to try to play Stormbringer, they had to use a cancel aura macro to cancel the buff of Tempest, and that's how bad it was. However, since then though, we got the big rework. We got the many changes, many positive changes also to their general tree. They were given more tankiness, they were given a raid buff. As that was happening, Farseer also got fixed and then it got buffed multiple times. Stormbringer also got adjusted, they got buffed significantly in the damage it does. And a series of other positive changes and QOL improvements which skyrocketed the performance of Elemental, right? Elemental went to having one of the best profiles when it came to the AoE results, and even in single target, while not having the highest set of results, they still had one of the 3 to 4 to 5 highest results as well. But what was also positive at the time when we got these changes was the potential. You know, the potential to do well for Elemental when it came to the rotation, when it came to varying your playstyle. Because one of the things that was also quite annoying for Elemental Shaman, and which had become annoying for quite a while at that point, was the fact that the rotation of Elemental Shaman practically revolved to this in Dragonflight. It just revolved into you spamming nothing but Lava Burst, consume your Maelstrom with Elemental Blast, and then it was mostly a whole lot of Lava Burst damage. These changes coming in the rework were also promising because they were powering up other parts of your rotation. They were giving you a new Ice Fury cooked into your Frost Shock. That was also going to give you a free extra Elemental Blast whenever it was proccing, which was giving you practically a second Master of the Elements, buffing your next Lava Burst by 20%, and then after that Lava Burst, the Lava Burst would buff the next spell by 15%. So you would get into this cycle, into this flow of using Lightning Bolt, and then Ice Fury procs. You use Ice Fury, you get a free cast of Elemental Blast, and then because Ice Fury buffs Lava Burst, you cast Lava Burst, and after you cast Lava Burst, you can use your Spender with Master of the Elements. There was optimism, not just about the improvements in the damage, of course, of Elemental Shaman or even their tankiness, but also because the rotation looked to be smoothened out, looked to be more flexible. You looked to move away from the endless spam of Lava Burst and instead have a bit more of a diverse rotation. Now, initially this had very good results. It was also received very positively, and into the raid testing, the Mythic raid testing, Elemental Shaman was having a grand time, doing very well as doing very good damage. However, this was considered a tad bit too much by Blizzard, which brought us the set of changes that came to Shaman, which also included the long list of changes given to Elemental. This included, amongst other things, nerfing Elemental Blast and Lava Burst by 25%. It also included nerfing Earthquake by 15%, as well as nerfing Ice Fury by 85% with the buff of Earth Shock. by 25%. Now, since then, the raid testing ended. Since then, Elemental Shaman didn't even have working sims for quite a while, so we were left a little bit in the dark about the situation. We could see Elemental Shaman going in the beta of Mythic Plus, but that could show us their AoE damage, much less their single target damage. But then a couple of weeks later, Elemental Shaman was able to re-emerge from these set of changes, and their results were super good. However, after they re-emerged from those changes, something was different about Elemental. And the difference about Elemental was that after getting those changes, many of them being nerfs, the spec as a whole had regressed a little bit. Because even though their performance was still quite high and very nice, you can see now that their rotation, their spend time, so what they're actually doing when they cast spells, had become a little bit monotone. On top of that, not just a little bit monotone, but the complete opposite of what they used to do in single target, because in single target back then, Lightning Bolt was cast practically by mistake. These were probably 6 misclicks of this Shaman, which was busy spamming Lava Burst otherwise. Instead, now, after all of these changes, you have gone back to becoming a Lightning Bolt machine gun. Your build, compared to what it was and what players were excited about, had completely regressed, had completely lost what players were perhaps positive about when it came to the rotation. You abandoned Elemental Blast after getting nerfed by 25% in favor of Earthshock, who was buffed by 25%. You abandoned any hopes of using Ice Fury, of getting the free proc of Elemental Blast, of empowering your next Lava Burst. You just ditch this completely. You ditch Ascendance, any other talents synergizing with Ascendance, because you're not even bothering to cast that many Lava Bursts anymore. If you look at the results, practically Lava Burst with 20 casts in 5.5-6 minutes of this sim is practically only used every once in a while to buff your spenders, your finishers with Master of the Elements, and that's about it. And what's even worse, what is the real sad part about this, is that this is while playing Farseer, right? This is while playing supposedly the Lava Burst hero talent. The hero talent that buffs your Lava Burst, that gives you one more charge of your Lava Burst, that is supposedly synergizing with doing more with your Lava Burst, is still ignoring Lava Burst in favor of Lightning Bolt. The rest of your cast, in this case the small number of 227, are spent on Lightning Bolt now instead, which gives you this outlook of just spamming Lightning Bolt, every once in a while use Lava Burst to empower your Earthshock. Rinse and repeat. The changes put in this talent system have sort of sent the elemental lightning side of the talents into overload, no pun intended. A combination of things like Lightning Conduit giving you always 8% more nature damage, a combination of Elemental Unity giving you a very high uptime of 10% nature damage, because even in single target, when you don't get to hit more enemies, you will find your Storm Elemental having a 75% uptime. And of course, when it comes to AoE, when you can hit more enemies and get even more cooldown reduction, your Storm Elemental has the small number of 99% uptime, meaning that this 10% buff of nature damage is practically active at all times. So you have your 10% nature damage over here, your 8% nature damage over here, and then the final point, which is really making everything even more leaning towards spamming Lightning Bolt, is Flash of Lightning. Casting your Lightning Bolt, or in AoE, your Chain Lightning, reduces the cooldown of your nature spells. This counts every nature spell. Stormkeeper is a nature spell. Primordial Wave, because it does elemental damage, it counts as every type of spell, so it also counts for nature. You have your Storm Elemental, which is also a nature spell. So for example, when you go and check the cooldown of the spell, of the usage of the spell, you find Primordial Wave only having an 18-second cooldown, even though technically it's supposed to have a 30-second cooldown. But in that small window, you casted 13 Lightning Bolts, which reduce the cooldown of Primordial Wave by an extra 13 seconds. The same can be said for your Stormkeeper. If you go and look at the gap between Stormkeeper uses, you have 35 seconds. Even though Stormkeeper is supposed to have a 1 minute cooldown. And the same can be said for Storm Elemental. Back in the day, if you wanted the cooldown reduction of your Elemental, you had to use Lava Burst with Surge of Power to reduce the cooldown of your Elemental. Now, you don't even have to. Now you can continue using your Lightning Bolt after your Spender for Surge of Power's damage, because you're gonna get your cooldown reduction on your Elemental from your Flash of Lightning instead. And then sure, this part is not strictly about damage, but this one is so powerful, it can also benefit you in multiple other ways, because for example, your defensive Stone Bulwark Totem is a nature spell, meaning it gets reduced in cooldown by Flash of Lightning. Of course, you have also other things like Thunderstorm for crowd control, like Ancestral Guidance, even like your Wind Shear, your already very short cooldown is also a nature spell, so you can also bring this down to being something like a 7-second cooldown just by spamming your nature spells. So the problem after this is that you have gone back after the initial praises of the rework of becoming possibly a more diverse and a more varied rotation to be one of the more brain dead, one of the more dull, and one of the more simplistic rotations in the game. You're practically now rivaling, if not being even easier, than a Beast Mastery Hunter. There is not really any finesse to your play, not really any cooldown tracking or stacks tracking or buff tracking in this build. It is very, very monotone. When it comes to AoE, where you change from Farseer, actually, because of this, barely anything changes. If you remember, you might have heard before talking about how Shaman, not just enhancement, but elemental as well, were split between a storm build, a lightning build, and a more elementalist fire-sided build. After all of these changes and after all of the nerfs, that also went away. You're practically swapping your elemental equilibrium with liquid magma totem to make use of this in Mythic Plus because of multiple targets. But everything else basically remains the same. You're also getting your flame shock to tick more, other than Earthen Rage for single target damage. But besides that, it's practically the same build. You do the same things even if we go into AoE. Except in AoE situation, you will also be swarming with so much more Maelstrom, so much more resource. You're gonna be spending more time using your spender as opposed to single target, where you spend less time using your Earthshock than you do using Earthquake. But besides that, it remains practically the same. Spam Chain Lightning, use Earthquake. Every once in a while, your Lightning Bolt will turn into Tempest, so this time use Tempest instead of using Chain Lightning. In Mythic Plus, in AoE, you can make more use of the Lava Burst Primordial Wave combo, which even after the nerfs remain very powerful, because splintered elements even on just 5 targets can still give you 30% haste for 12 seconds, which is very big. And remember, because you're spamming Chain Lightning or Lightning Bolt, the cooldown of your Primordial Wave is very low now, which means you get to benefit from splintered elements even more. If you look at the buff gap here of splintered elements, the uptime is 61%, so it's almost 2/3 of the time you will be fighting, you will have this 30% plus haste in AoE. Because Primordial Wave doesn't have a 30-second cooldown, it's got a 20-second cooldown because it is being reduced by Flash of Lightning. And that was the consideration to be had for today. Because this roller coaster about Elemental Shaman started pretty low down before the rework, when the spec was still in a pretty bad spot. The hero talents were also looking quite disappointing, and then the rework came in, the hero talents were buffed, Elemental started doing much better, possibly even the rotation started looking even better. Then we came with the balance tuning, things got changed, and what came out of it was definitely a less exciting, less diverse, and less engaging kind of spec. It's now much more close to being a 2-button spec, not nearly as varied, not nearly as exciting as it perhaps could have been before the changes. Obviously, as pointed out, for now the performance is still there. Elemental Shaman is still doing very well. So for now, perhaps many players will simply ignore or not care about the spec playing terribly, because the results are here for the moment. But from a gameplay perspective, the most recent changes have definitely worsened the state of the spec. So with this update on the state of Elemental Shaman, this one being a prime spec for possibly being meta in the very near future, we can now leave each other on this Monday. We're starting, of course, as usual, with the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, as well as for liking and commenting down below, together with subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I know technically it isn't, I know technically September is still mostly summer, but please, can we get away from this heat already?